What's going on guys, Bunks here, and today, as it's release day for No Man's Sky on Nintendo Switch, I thought I'd do an essential starter guide for surviving the first day on that very first hazardous planet, and then giving you some essential tips to get started and well set up in the game, so you can make most of it and have some fun. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get stuck in. So first things first, right off the bat when you start the game, you're going to be thrown onto a hazardous planet, whether it be a toxic one, a super cold one, super hot one, etc, etc. And you're also not going to have access to your ship because you first need to find it, and if there are any caves nearby, you want to make use of these to protect yourself from the hazardous weather, which would kill you before you've even managed to save your game, and we don't want that, right, do we? There are two things you need to do first in the game, and one of them is to repair your scanner, and you can use your multi-tools mining laser for this. You should see rocks all over which will give you ferrite dust, so mine that until you get enough to repair your scanner, and then of course, repair it. And now that you've got yourself a nice working scanner, you're going to need to use it to gather some resources for actually surviving, and the way to do this is to gather some sodium and oxygen. So hit your left analog stick and PlayStation, Xbox, or C if you're on PC, sodium will appear as Na in orange and oxygen will appear as O2 in red, so look around for those, and once you've used your scanner, go ahead and gather as much of this as you can. Sodium is going to recharge your exosuit's hazard protection, whilst oxygen will recharge your life support. So now you'll be able to recharge both. Great! Pro tip, if you hop on into photo mode, which can be found in the bottom menu using the down arrow on consoles, and then zoom out, sodium will be glowing orange and oxygen will be glowing red, so you can see where these are nearby and run over and grab them. You won't lose any health or hazard protection whilst in photo mode because the game is essentially paused. Right, now that you've fixed your scanner and performed scan, you should see the ship's icon appear in your heads-up display, so go ahead and head over to it. You may notice en route to your ship that you could see some green crates and perhaps some yellow and red boxes nearby. You should definitely gather everything that comes from these in the early game with the exception of rusted metal. We'll need to remove the rusted metal to get into the green crates to get that valuable resource inside, but you can safely discard that because it's not really useful in the very early game. Now once you've made it to your ship and jumped on inside, you'll notice that your hazard protection will regenerate automatically, which is pretty awesome. Your life support however will not, so keep using oxygen for that, but if you're running low on sodium at this stage, just jump into your ship for a minute and let it recharge. Now I'm probably assuming at this point that you want to fly off into space and start exploring, but you'll notice that your ship is of course broken, and there are two major components that need fixing, and they are the pulse engine and your launch thrusters. You'll need to find the resources to fix these, but luckily these are fairly easy to gather and fairly easy to craft. Right, so let's start with the pulse engine. To fix this, you're going to need to have one metal plating and one hermetic seal. Now if you've gathered a good chunk of ferrite dust early on, you can use 50 units of this to craft one metal plating in your inventory. If not, just gather some ferrite dust, which is widely available, using the rocks nearby, and then craft that metal plating once you've got 50. And once you have placed that metal plating in your pulse engine, you should then get a message saying that there is a distress beacon nearby and that you need to salvage the planetary chart from it. It should be basically next to your ship, so go ahead and gather that planetary chart, open up your inventory and click on it to plot a route, and a new marker should appear in your heads-up display. And when it does, begin to make your way over to it. Now don't be surprised to see a storm incoming warning here, so at this point don't stand around gathering resources, there'll be plenty of time to do that later, so just head on straight to the red marker as fast as you can. And once you finally get there, you should see a couple of boxes on the wall. One is a research specimen and the other one is a hollow archive, which is where the hermetic seal will come from to fix the rest of your pulse engine, so go ahead and grab them. And now you want to make it back to your ship, but you're probably wondering where on earth actually is it. So now the next step is to fix the analysis visor on your multi-tool, and thankfully this is super easy. You need to craft a carbon nanotube, and all that requires is 50 units of carbon, which can be found from mining almost any plant you see around, and then craft that carbon nanotube to fix your analysis visor. And once you have, look into your analysis visor and have a look around for your ship and then head on back to it. As a side note, you can make loads of money from scanning plants and creatures from your analysis visor using R2 and RT on PlayStation and Xbox respectively. And if you get S-Class upgrades to your multi-tool later on from the space station, you'll be making hundreds of thousand units per scan, so it's definitely worth it when you're starting out in the game and want to get some money. Now, moving on to fixing that launch thruster, this is going to require 1 dihydrogen jelly and 50 pure ferrite. Now, dihydrogen jelly is really easy to craft and it just requires 40 dihydrogen. So go and mine some of those blue crystals you see around all over the place and craft yourself some dihydrogen jelly. Pretty simple, right? Next up, you're going to need pure ferrite, but you are going to first need to craft a personal refiner for this, and that requires 1 metal plating and 30 units of oxygen. As previously mentioned, oxygen can be found by scanning and walking over to the red O2 icons, and metal plating can then be crafted using 50 ferrite dust. So grab those resources and build yourself a personal refiner and then place it down in front of you. Now, if you stick a good chunk of that ferrite dust into your personal refiner along with some carbon to fuel it, you're going to make that pure ferrite in no time at all to fix your launch thruster. Woo! Now you've got those resources, you can go ahead and fix the rest of your ship. Winning! Before you do fly off after fixing your ship, however, there are a few essential resources that you're going to need very early on in the game. Unfortunately, these are all very common, so you should gather a stack or 2 of these before you first leave the planet to keep you going early on in the game. These essential resources are oxygen and sodium, as I've previously mentioned, for life support and hazard protection, recharging respectively. Carbon, which is also incredibly common in No Man's Sky, and this is primarily used early on in the game anyway to refuel your multi-tools mining beam, along with a wide variety of crafting, refining and cooking recipes the further you get into the game. And of course, it charges your personal refiner. As previously mentioned, dihydrogen, which you should see all over planets. They are blue crystals and will appear when you perform a scan as a blue H. Dihydrogen is used early on to refuel your starship, allowing you to travel between planets and systems, and it is also used when crafting and refining a bunch of recipes. Next up, as previously mentioned, is ferrite dust, which is also extremely common on almost all planets. In the early game, it is used primarily for crafting many recipes, and also for building the basics of your base. It will also be used in a wide variety of refining recipes later on. And the final essential resource, even though you do need to leave the planet for this, is tritium, and that can be gathered by shooting asteroids. It will be used early on for charging your starship's pulse engine, allowing you to travel quicker within a specific system. Now, you probably want to make some money early on in the game as well, so my next tip is to find a nearby cave on your starting planet and gather the valuable resources from it. Inside caves, you'll find plenty of cobalt, which, if you gather enough of, can get you thousands of units when selling them on board the space station, and you may also find some vortex cubes, which are worth a pretty penny as well. So if you see those, gather as many as you can, along with as much cobalt as you can carry, and then jump on into your spaceship and flying out to space for the first time. Woo! A quick side note here, keep jumping in and out of your starship to save your game, because the last thing you want is to lose all of your progress at this stage, right? Now, if you're lucky in a way like I am, you'll also be on a planet that has an abundance of salt, and that is another fairly valuable resource that you can gather. I spent a few minutes gathering salt nearby and had enough to sell it for around 110,000 units, which is pretty decent early on. If you shove that salt into a refiner, it becomes chlorine, which is worth even more. So if, like me, your starter planet has plenty of salt around, mine loads of it and then shove it into the refiner and make it into chlorine to make yourself hundreds of thousand units early on, which is a great start. And also, whilst you're here, it would be totally awesome if you could support my channel and hit those like and subscribe buttons. So shortly after you've jumped into space, you should receive a transmission. Answering this will direct you to a signal on a nearby planet, so go ahead and travel down there and land it in the indicated area. And once on foot, you're going to need you to use your analysis visor to locate the precise location of the signal, and then once you've eventually found the source and interacted with the next transmission, you're going to be provided with blueprints to the base computer and the terrain manipulator. Now, the terrain manipulator is really useful and it is required to mine metals, which you will need in order to build your base computer and lots of other components later on in the game. First, to craft the terrain manipulator, you're going to need dihydrogen jelly and 2 carbon nanotubes, which you've already created up to this point in the video, so gather the resource for that if you don't have enough, and then get to crafting that terrain manipulator. So as I mentioned, the terrain manipulator can be used to gather precious metals from all over each and every planet, and these can be used for crafting and building later on, but for this guide we need to look for copper. So use your analysis visor to search for copper deposits and then make your way over to the nearest one, take out your terrain manipulator and gather all of that copper. You want to gather an absolute minimum of 60 units of it, because in just a second we're going to lob it into the personal refiner along with some carbon to create 30 units of chromatic metal. Now if you gather a lot more than 60 units of copper, don't worry because chromatic metal is used for plenty of things in No Man's Sky, so it's always worth having some in your inventory. And now you can craft that base computer once you have 30 chromatic metal. Now before I move on to the absolute basics of building a base here, I'm going to suggest you go off hunting nearby for some buried technology because you're going to need that salvage data from them to be able to construct a couple of things in just a minute. The good news is you probably don't have to travel far before you get enough for the purpose of this next base building step. You probably only need say 4 or 5 salvage data, and you can get them from acquiring 2 buried technology components. Now buried technology is needed to be able to unlock base building parts, so they're pretty damn important. You can, if you prefer, also sell them on board the space station for many thousands of units, or refine them in your personal refiner for a tasty amount of nanites. It really is up to you at this stage of the game. But for this video I'm going to show you how to find them. So take out your analysis visor again and search for the Wi-Fi signal icons, which will be underground, and this will indicate some buried technologies over there, so go ahead and walk over. And you would also see this sparkling broken pod, which can give you some valuable resources or nanites, so grab everything you can from there as well. So we are going to build a little base just to begin with, and it's really easy. All you need is some carbon, a little bit of ferrodust and a little bit of pure ferrite. And all we're going to make is one little room with a floor, 3 walls, a door and a roof. And then even though I'm on a paradise planet, a storm's going to be coming in just to show you that it can protect you from the storm. Now that you've got your little hut, the next step is to add a teleporter and of course then power the teleporter, which is going to use a biofuel reactor. By now you should know how to craft both metal plating and carbon nanotubes along with some sodium which are needed to build the teleporter, so go ahead and do that and then place it down near your little hut. You're then going to need to visit the construction terminal once again and then learn the biofuel reactor. I would also learn the electrical wiring whilst you're here as well, because you're going to need that to connect the biofuel reactor to the teleporter. The biofuel reactor itself is super simple to craft as well, and all you need is oxygen and more metal plating. So build that and place it near the teleporter, and then if you've got the electrical wiring already from the construction unit, you can then connect the biofuel reactor to the teleporter, or if you didn't, go back to the construction terminal, get the wiring and then connect them both up together. Now to actually generate power from the reactor, you're going to need to lob some carbon into it, and voila, the base teleporter is now usable, though of course at this stage you can't actually go anywhere just yet, but that'll come further into the game when you visit more space stations, settlements, planets and so on. Now, base building really is a huge aspect of No Man's Sky, and it would take many videos to cover even just the basics of it, some of which I've already done already, so why not go check those out. I'll leave a link to the playlist in the description below for you. Now, you've got that terrain manipulator, you've fixed your ship, and you've gathered some resources on the space station to give you a nice starting point with money. So go ahead and fly into space, and then you should notice somewhere on your heads-up display an orange icon. And that orange icon indicates where the space station is, so you should begin flying in that direction, and whilst you're doing that, be sure to shoot as many asteroids as you can. By shooting asteroids, you're going to gather some valuable and essential resources from these, such as tritium for using your pulse drive, silver, gold and platinum for selling on board the space station in the early game and crafting later on, once you've got enough money. Now of course there are many more methods of making millions of units in the early game, and I'll be releasing a video showing you how to do exactly that in just a couple of days, so make sure you're subscribed and notifications turned on so you don't miss out on that. Now there is plenty to do on the space station, and none is more important in the very early game as visiting the exosuit NPC station to get yourself an exosuit expansion slot. And that is available on board the space station and the anomaly once per system, so it's essential you do this in every system you visit to vastly increase your inventory capacity. It will cost more and more money the more and more you get, but it is totally worth it. Now there are other NPCs on board the space station selling you upgrades for your multi-tool, exocraft and starship along with your exosuit, so be sure to be visiting all of them as you progress throughout the game. There is also an NPC who will give you missions with valuable resources and rewards, so make sure you do those as well. And finally there is the cartographer, who's going to give you various planetary charts to locations such as abandoned buildings, manufacturing facilities, crashed ships and so on, so be sure to explore each of those NPCs. And one last note on the space station whilst you're up there, gather all of the blue and orange glowing cubes on tables you find, because these are going to give you navigational charts which you can exchange for planetary charts with a cartographer, or they will give you a handful of nanites which you'll use to buy upgrades for all of your things, so both options are valuable early on. Now I'll stop here with this beginner guide because otherwise I'll be here all day and you don't want that, you want to play the game, but by this point you should have a working ship, a few 100,000 nanites and know how to make more along with the basics of the game. So I'll leave you with one last tip, and that is to follow the tutorial missions within the game, as these are going to get you set up with base building, travelling throughout the galaxy and gain you access to the anomaly, which is another video in itself. Now of course, No Man's Sky is such a vast game, so there's still loads more for you guys to learn, and over the past couple of years I've been adding various tutorial videos to my No Man's Sky beginning guide playlist, so why don't you go ahead and check some of those out after watching this. I do also have 2 videos coming out over the next couple of days which are going to show you how to make yourself millions of units early on and also thousands of nanites. So be sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons and turn on those notifications so you don't miss out on those videos. And as I previously mentioned, I also have plenty of other No Man's Sky beginner guides, so be sure to check those out along with other videos like glitches, amazing locations and much more. As always, I hope you find this video useful and thank you for watching and catch you next time.